Sheriff Thomas Hale's horse slowed to a halt. Blood. Fresh and dark against the sun-bleached road leading into Copper Ridge. His hand instinctively moved to his revolver as he followed the crimson trail into the mesquite brush. She lay crumpled in the dirt like a broken doll in Apache woman. Tall and young. Her buckskin dress torn and soaked through with blood. Purple bruises bloomed across her face and arms, deep gashes carved into her shoulders. This wasn't random violence. This was execution. Her eyes snapped open, black and fierce, blazing with desperate vigilance even as death circled. She tried to crawl away from him, leaving a smear of red in the dust. "Easy now," Hale whispered, dismounting slowly. Her hand clutched something, a strip of leather marked with ancient symbols he didn't recognize. Then he heard it. Distant thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Hoofbeats. Someone was coming to finish what they'd started. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. 6 hours earlier, Thomas Hale had stood at his wife's grave as the sun broke over Copper Ridge. 15 years, Margaret had been gone, yet he still came every morning, hat in hand, telling her about his day ahead. The headstone bore only her name, no mention of where she'd come from. No hint of the secrets she'd carried to her death. The town had changed since those early days. What began as a peaceful border settlement had curdled into something ugly. Half the population wanted war with the Apache, wanted their land, wanted the gold everyone whispered about in the hills. The other half just wanted to survive another season without bloodshed. Hale's son Caleb had chosen a side. At 30 years old, he'd become everything his father wasn't: ambitious, ruthless, leading a crew of miners and fortune seekers who spoke openly about clearing out the Red Menace. They barely spoke anymore. Most days, Hale pretended he didn't have a son at all. Now, as darkness fell over his small house on the edge of town, Hale carried the Apache woman through his back door. Her breathing came shallow and ragged. Blood soaked through his shirt where he'd held her against his chest during the ride home. "Doc," he called softly, and Henry Miller emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting. "Thomas, are you out of your mind?" Doc Miller's voice trembled as he stared at the woman. "She's Apache. If anyone finds out, then we make sure they don't find out." Doc's hands were already moving, old instincts overriding fear. He cut away the torn buckskin, revealing the extent of her injuries. Bruises layered upon bruises, bullet wound in her left shoulder. The entry clean, but the exit devastating. Someone had wanted her to suffer before she died. Hale held the lantern steady as Doc worked, probing for the bullet with practiced fingers. The woman remained unconscious, which was a mercy. When the bullet finally came free with a wet sound, Hale caught it in his palm. His breath stopped. Carved into the lead was a single initial C. His son's initial. No, it couldn't be. Caleb was reckless, greedy, but not a murderer. Not this. The woman's eyes opened suddenly, black and wild with terror. She thrashed against Doc's hands, a cry caught in her throat. Her gaze locked on Hale, assessing, calculating, looking for the knife, the gun, the final blow. "You're safe," Hale said quietly, knowing she probably couldn't understand. "I'm not going to hurt you." Something in his voice must have reached her. She went still, though her eyes never left his face. Watching, waiting. The wariness of prey that's been hunted too long. Doc finished bandaging her shoulder and stepped back. "She needs rest and prayer, probably. I'll check on her tomorrow if we're both still alive." After Doc left through the back door, Hale sat in the chair beside his bed where the woman now lay. He'd given her his own blanket, the one Margaret had sewn, outside. Somewhere in the darkness, his son was planning something terrible, and Thomas Hale had just chosen his side. Dawn came with a soft knock at the door. Hale's hand went to his pistol as he approached. But the voice that came through the wood was measured and calm. "Sheriff Hale, I come alone and unarmed. I seek only to speak with you about my sister." Sister? Hale opened the door to find a man in his 60s standing on the porch, wearing traditional Apache clothing, but carrying himself with the bearing of someone who'd walked between two worlds. Deep scars mapped his weathered face, the kind earned in battles that were never recorded in any history book. "Chief Nietzsche," the man introduced himself in flawless English. "I've come to collect my sister." "Your sister?" Hale glanced back at the woman, sleeping fitfully in his bed. "Not by blood, by bond. Her name is Kiona. She is precious to my people, to all people. If they only knew." Nietzsche's dark eyes held something Hale recognized the weight of impossible responsibility. "May I enter? What I must tell you cannot be spoken where others might hear." Hale stepped aside. Nietzsche moved past him with quiet dignity, his gaze falling on Kiona. Relief softened his features for just a moment before the mask returned. From within his clothing, Nietzsche produced a leather pouch, aged and cracked. He handed it to Hale. "Before you decide whether to help us, you must understand what is at stake." The pouch was sealed with red wax bearing a symbol Hale had never seen. Two hands clasped together, one pale, one dark, surrounded by flames and water intertwined. He broke the seal and withdrew several pages of thin parchment, covered in both English and Apache writing. Nietzsche spoke as Hale read. "Kiona is the last keeper of the Blood Moon ceremony. For 2 generations, the role has passed mother to daughter in her line. She alone knows the words, the rituals, the precise movements that must be performed when the moon turns red." "A ceremony for what?" Hale's eyes scanned the parchment, seeing references to treaties, to ancient agreements, to blood oaths sworn under desert stars. "Peace. 2 Apache tribes have been at war for 3 generations over land rights, land that sits between the white settlements and our traditional territories. Every 28 years, during the Blood Moon, a ceremony can be performed at Temple Rock to renew the peace treaty. Without it, the fighting begins again." Nietzsche's voice dropped. "And when our people fight each other, the white men who want our land will use it as justification to destroy us all." Hale looked up sharply. "The gold?" $5 million worth, by some estimates. Perhaps more." Nietzsche's expression hardened. "There are men in your town who would see every Apache dead to claim it. They cannot allow the ceremony to succeed. They need our tribes to destroy each other." The papers trembled in Hale's hands. "How long until the Blood Moon?" 7 days, 168 hours. Nietzsche moved to the window, scanning the street beyond. "If Kiona dies, there is no one else who knows the ceremony. No one who can speak the words or trace the symbols. War becomes inevitable, and when our people are weakened by fighting amongst ourselves, the mining companies will move in with their hired guns and their government papers. And we will be erased." Hale set the papers down on his table. One particular detail caught his eye, a note about blood that had been sealed into the original treaty. He looked closer. The wax seal on the pouch had blood mixed into it, dark and still slightly wet, despite obviously being decades old. "The blood doesn't dry," he said. "No. It is a reminder that some oaths cannot be broken without consequence. Naichi turned from the window. Those who attack the ceremony keeper are cursed to die by the same violence they intended. But curses mean little to desperate men. You said someone from my town did this to her. We have been watching. The attack was coordinated. Someone paid good money to have Kiona intercepted on her way to meet with me. Naichi's gaze was steady. The enemy is not my people. Sheriff, the enemy is someone who profits from our extinction. Before Hale could respond, Kiona stirred. Her eyes opened, clearer now than they'd been the night before. She looked at Naichi first, said something in Apache that made him smile sadly. Then her gaze moved to Hale. And this time there was no fear, only a cautious curiosity, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Naichi spoke to her in their language. She responded, her voice hoarse but growing stronger. They conversed for a moment before Naichi turned back to Hale. She says you have kind hands, like someone she knew long ago. Something passed across Naichi's face, recognition, perhaps, or memory. You remind me of a man Kiona's sister once loved, a white man who chose honor over hate. The words hit Hale like a physical blow. Margaret. Could it be possible? Before he could ask, the sound of shattering glass erupted from the front room, then another, rocks crashing through windows, followed by angry voices rising from the street. Hale, you traitor, bring out the Indian. We know she's in there. Naichi's hand moved to a knife at his belt. Kiona tried to sit up, wincing in pain. And Thomas Hale stood frozen between his past and his future, knowing that whatever choice he made in the next few seconds would determine whether hundreds lived or died. The voices outside grew louder, more violent. 7 days until the blood moon. But they might not survive 7 minutes. The crowd outside grew like a living thing, feeding on its own anger. Hale moved to the broken window and saw at least 30 men gathered in the street, some carrying torches despite the afternoon sun. At their center stood Samuel Blackwood, owner of the Copper Ridge Mining Company, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed obscene against the dust and poverty surrounding him. Sheriff Hale? Blackwood called out, his voice carrying the false warmth of a snake oil salesman. We know you're harboring one of them in there. The good people of this town have a right to know why you're protecting our enemy. Hale's jaw tightened. Naichi had already slipped out the back door with a promise to return, leaving Hale alone to face what was coming. Kiona remained in the bedroom, too weak to move, her breathing shallow as infection began its cruel work. There's no enemy here, Hale shouted back. Just an injured woman who needed help. Since when is mercy a crime in Copper Ridge? Since that mercy threatens every family in this town, a voice yelled from the crowd. Hale recognized it, Jacob Stone, his deputy of 20 years. The betrayal cut deeper than he wanted to admit. She's Apache, Thomas. While you're playing nursemaid, her people could be planning an attack. The mob roared its agreement. Hale saw faces he'd known for decades, people he'd helped, people who'd sat in his church and called him friend. Now they looked at him like he was the enemy. You've all lost your minds, Hale said quietly, knowing they couldn't hear him over their own noise. He thought of Margaret, of the countless times she must have felt this same isolation, this same crushing weight of being seen as other, as dangerous, as less than human. How had she smiled through it? How had she loved him despite knowing what his people were capable of? Blood is thicker than water, his father used to say. But standing there, watching his own deputy lead a mob against him, Hale understood that some bonds ran deeper than blood. honor was thicker than both. The afternoon bled into evening. The crowd didn't disperse, if anything. It grew larger as word spread through town. Women joined the men, their faces twisted with a fear that had been carefully cultivated by those who stood to profit from it. Children threw stones at his walls, encouraged by their parents' hate. Hale sat in the darkness of his home, listening to their chants, their threats, their promises of justice. He'd been a lawman for 35 years. He'd believed in the system, in order, in the notion that good men could hold back the tide of chaos through will and principle alone. He'd been a fool. When full darkness fell, he heard the soft knock at his back door. Doc Miller slipped inside, his medical bag clutched tight, his face pale with fear. "Thomas, the whole town's gone mad," Doc whispered. "Blackwood's been buying drinks at the saloon, filling everyone's heads with stories about Apache raids and massacres. He's got them convinced that if you're protecting one of them, you must be part of some larger plot. Did you bring the medicine?" Doc nodded, moving toward the bedroom where Kiona lay fevered and trembling. "But Thomas, you need to understand, I can't keep coming here. My wife, my practice, everything I've built. If they find out I'm helping you..." "I understand." Hale's voice carried no judgment, only exhaustion. "Do what you can for her tonight. I won't ask you to come back." Doc worked in silence, changing bandages, administering what little medicine he had. When he finished, he stood by the bed for a long moment, looking down at Kiona's unconscious form. "She's somebody's daughter," Doc said softly. "Somebody's sister. How did we forget that?" He turned to leave, but Hale caught his arm. "Henry, if something happens to me..." "Nothing's going to happen to you. You're Thomas Hale. This town needs you. This town wants me dead." Hale's smile held no humor. "But if I don't make it, there's a journal in my desk. Margaret's journal. Make sure it gets to the territorial governor. There are things in there about Blackwood, about land deals and bribes. Things that could stop whatever he's planning." Doc nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. He left through the back door, disappearing into the alley's shadows. He made it 3 blocks before they caught him. Hale heard the commotion shouts, the sound of breaking glass, a scream that cut through the night like a blade. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the noise, knowing, even as he did, that he was already too late. They'd cornered Doc Miller in the street outside the general store. 5 men, maybe 6. Their faces hidden by bandanas. One of them held a torch, another held a rope. "We followed him," one of the men said. "Watched him go into the sheriff's house. Watched him come out. You want to tell us what business you had with that Indian lover, Doc?" "I'm a physician," Doc said, his voice steady despite the blood running from his nose. "I take care of whoever needs it. It's called the Hippocratic Oath. Maybe you've heard of it." The man with the rope stepped forward. "Maybe we need to teach you about loyalty." "Stop!" Hale's voice cracked across the distance like a whip. He had his rifle raised, aimed at the group. "Step away from him, now." For a moment, everything froze. Then one of the men laughed. "You going to shoot us all? Sheriff, you going to murder white men to protect your Apache whore?" The words were meant to provoke, to push him past reason into rage. Hale held steady, his finger resting beside the trigger. "Not on it. Not yet. I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," Hale said. "One chance to remember who you are, who your parents raised you to be. One chance to..." The man with the rope moved fast, too fast. He swung at Doc, the rope becoming a weapon, catching him across the throat. Doc went down hard, gasping for air. The others closed in, boots and fists falling like rain. Hale fired a warning shot into the air. The men scattered like cockroaches, melting into the darkness between buildings. But the damage was done. Doc lay in the dirt, blood pooling around his head. Hale dropped to his knees beside his old friend, cradling him as gently as he'd once cradled his own son. "Henry, hold on. I'll get you help. In my bag," Doc whispered, each word costing him. Journal. Found it. In old records. Blackwood. Conspiracy. Everything. His hand fumbled at his coat pocket. "Truth. The truth, Will." His eyes went distant. His chest stopped rising. Thomas Hale knelt in the street, holding the body of the last friend he had in the world. And for the first time in 15 years, he wept. Not quietly, not with dignity, but with the raw, broken sound of a man who'd finally reached the limit of what he could bear. A shadow appeared in the window above him. Kiona, somehow standing despite her injuries. One hand pressed against the glass. Her face was wet with tears. She'd seen everything, understood everything. Hale gently closed Doc's eyes and reached into the dead man's pocket. The journal was there, small and leather-bound, its pages filled with careful handwriting. He opened it to the first entry, and his blood turned to ice. The name at the top of the page, Caleb Hale. His son wasn't just involved in the conspiracy. His son was at the center of it. Hale couldn't stay in town. They'd come for him, soon come with guns and rope and righteous fury, claiming justice for a murder he didn't commit, but would be blamed for anyway. He wrapped Doc Miller's body in a blanket and left it on the steps of the church with a note pinned to the cloth. Murdered by cowards. His only crime was mercy. Then he went back for Kiona. She was standing now, barely. One hand braced against the wall for support. Her fever had broken some time during the violence, leaving her weak but lucid. When Hale entered, she didn't flinch. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death to fear it anymore. "We have to leave," he said. "Can you ride?" She nodded once, no words. But the message was clear: she'd ride or die trying. There was only one person in Copper Ridge who might still help them. Sarah Mae Johnson ran the general store on the edge of town. A widow in her 70s who had known Margaret and had always treated Hale with a kindness that felt like grace. He went to her back door just before dawn, Kiona leaning heavily against his side. Sarah opened the door in her nightdress, took one look at them, and stepped aside without a word. She had supplies ready within minutes: food, water, blankets, ammunition. Things she must have prepared the moment she heard about Doc Miller's death. "Margaret would have done the same thing you're doing," Sarah said as she tied the supply bundles. "She would have chosen right over easy every single time. That's why I loved her. That's why this whole godforsaken town should have loved her. But they were too blind to see what she was." Hale's hand stilled on the rope he was coiling. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked at him with something like pity. "Thomas, you really didn't know all those years together, and she never told you." "Told me what?" But Sarah just shook her head. "It's not my story to tell. But when this is over, when you've kept that girl safe, you ask her about her sister. About the woman who ran away from her people to marry a white lawman who saw her as human when everyone else saw her as savage." The words hit him like bullets. Margaret. His Margaret. Could it be true? He wanted to ask more, but Kiona was swaying on her feet, and the eastern sky was beginning to pale. They had to move. Sarah pressed a final bundle into his hands, this one smaller, wrapped in oilcloth. "Don't open it until you're safe. Margaret gave it to me before she died. Made me promise to give it to you if you ever needed to remember why love matters more than hate." They left Copper Ridge as the sun rose, heading northeast toward the Badlands where the Apaches still held territory. Kiona rode behind Hale on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her breathing labored but steady. Every few miles, he stopped to let her rest, to give her water, to check the bandages that were already seeping red again. She never complained, never asked him to slow down or turn back, just held on with a grip that spoke of determination that went bone deep. By the second day, they'd reached the foothills. Hale found a cave, small but defensible, and made camp while Kiona collapsed against the stone wall. He built a fire, heated water, tried to make her comfortable with what little they had. When night fell and she slept, he finally opened Doc Miller's journal. The entries were meticulous, dated and detailed. Doc had been documenting the conspiracy for months, recording conversations he'd overheard, transactions he'd witnessed, meetings that took place in the saloon's back room when men thought no one was listening. Samuel Blackwood's name appeared on every page. He'd been planning this for years, buying up land options, bribing territorial officials, positioning his mining company to swoop in the moment the Apache territories became available. But he needed a catalyst. He needed violence that would justify military intervention. So he'd created it. Blackwood had been funding both Apache tribes, playing them against each other, ensuring that old grievances never healed. He'd hired men to commit atrocities dressed as Apache warriors, terrorizing white settlements to build fear and hatred. He'd even orchestrated the attack on the wagon train 3 years ago that had killed 15 people and nearly started an all-out war. And his lead operative, his right hand in all of it, was Caleb Hale. The words blurred as Hale read them. His son, his boy, the child he'd taught to ride, to shoot, to treat every person with dignity regardless of the color of their skin. Somewhere along the way, that boy had died and been replaced by this stranger who dealt in death and greed. Doc had written, "Caleb Hale has been paid over $50,000 by Blackwood Industries in the past 2 years. The money has gone to gambling debts in Santa Fe, to a mistress in Tucson, to failed mining ventures that should have taught him humility but instead taught him desperation. He owes Blackwood everything now. His loyalty isn't to his father or his town or even his own soul. It's to the man who can keep him from financial ruin." There was more. Plans to attack the Apache village where Kiona had been staying. Details about the men hired to intercept her on her way to meet Chief Naichi. And a final note, written just days before Doc's death. "Caleb asked me about his mother today, about whether I'd known her before she married Thomas. I lied and said no. But I remembered her, remembered the Apache woman who used to trade herbs for medicine, who spoke perfect English and wore white woman's clothes like a costume she couldn't quite make fit. Margaret was never just Margaret. She was Ayanna of the Western Apache, daughter of a chief, sister to the girl who now holds the key to peace, and Caleb is about to help murder his own blood without knowing it." Hale closed the journal. His hands were shaking. 35 years of marriage, and Margaret had never told him. Had she been protecting him? Protecting herself? Or had she simply wanted one part of her life that wasn't defined by the color of her skin? A sound made him turn. Kiona was sitting up, watching him in the firelight. "You read something that hurt you," she said in perfect, unaccented English. Hale's breath caught. You speak English? I speak 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Apache. I learned as a child because my sister told me knowledge was armor. Kiona's dark eyes reflected the flames. I didn't speak before because I needed to know who you were. Whether you would hurt me or help me. Words can be weapons or shields. Sheriff, I chose shield. Your sister, Hale said slowly. Tell me about her. Kiona was quiet for a long moment. Her name was Ayana. It means eternal blossom. She was beautiful and brave and foolish enough to believe that love could build bridges across canyons of hate. She paused. She fell in love with a white man, a soldier turned lawman who saw her as a woman first and Apache second. Our tribe cast her out, said she betrayed her people by marrying him, by taking his name, by bearing his child. The cave seemed to shrink around Hale. What happened to her? She died 15 years ago of a weak heart, though some said it was a broken heart that killed her. She'd been cut off from her family, from her history, living in a town that would have destroyed her if they'd known what she was. Kiona's voice cracked. She died alone, pretending to be someone she wasn't. And I never got to tell her I forgave her for leaving, that I understood why she chose love over blood. Ayana, Hale whispered. The name Margaret had murmured in her sleep sometimes, during the fevers near the end. He'd thought it was delirium. It had been grief. She had a scar, Kiona continued, on her back, between her shoulder blades, from the punishment our tribe gave her before she left. They whipped her, Sheriff, whipped her until she bled, then told her she was dead to them. That's what love cost her. Hale had seen that scar 1,000 times, had traced it with his fingers in the darkness, had asked her once where it came from, and accepted her lie about a childhood accident. He'd been so careful never to push, never to demand her secrets, and now those secrets were unraveling, binding him to this woman who was family in ways he'd never imagined. She spoke about you, Hale said, not by name, but in her fever dreams. She talked about a little sister with dark eyes and a voice that could calm storms. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find you, protect you, but she never told me how. She was protecting you, if you'd known. If anyone had known, you would have been destroyed by association. Better to let you believe the lie. Kiona smiled sadly. My sister loved you enough to become a ghost. Do you understand what that means? She erased herself so you could be whole. The fire crackled outside. Coyotes called to each other across the desert floor. And Thomas Hale sat with the weight of 35 years of love and lies pressing down on his chest like stones. The boy in Doc's journal, Kiona said softly. The one helping Blackwood? That's your son, isn't it? Hale nodded, not trusting his voice. He doesn't know about his mother, about me, about what he's really doing. No. Will you tell him? Hale looked at her, at this woman who was his family, who carried his wife's blood, who held the power to save or damn hundreds with her knowledge. If I get the chance, he said. If he doesn't kill us both first. Far away, in a saloon in Copper Ridge. Caleb Hale sat sharpening a knife. Around him, 20 men drank and laughed and planned their attack on the Apache village where they believed the ceremonial site was hidden. Blackwood had promised $50,000 to whoever brought him proof of Kiona's death. Caleb needed that money. Needed it more than he needed his father's approval or his mother's memory or anything resembling a soul. He tested the knife's edge against his thumb. Sharp enough to kill. Sharp enough to finish what he'd started on that dusty road when he'd left Kiona bleeding and certain she would die before anyone found her. He didn't feel guilty. Didn't feel anything except the grinding desperation of a man who'd lost everything to his own weakness and would do anything hurt anyone to claw his way back. At the bar, Deputy Jacob Stone raised his glass. "To justice," he said. "To gold," Blackwood corrected, smiling. Caleb drank and said nothing. He was thinking about the look in his father's eyes the last time they'd spoken, before all of this started. Disappointment. That's what he'd seen. Not anger or hate, but the crushing weight of a father's disappointment in a son who'd taken every blessing and turned it to ash. Well, the old man would really be disappointed now. 3 days until the blood moon. 3 days until Caleb would have to look at his father across the barrel of a gun and choose between family and survival. He already knew which one he'd pick. The knife gleamed in the lamplight, hungry for blood. The hidden Apache village appeared like a mirage in the morning light, a collection of wiki-ups nestled in a box canyon that couldn't be seen from any trail. Hale had followed Kiona's whispered directions through terrain that would have killed him without her knowledge, and now they descended into a world he'd never imagined existed so close to Copper Ridge. Chief Naichi waited at the canyon entrance, flanked by 2 warriors who lowered their rifles when they recognized Kiona. The chief's weathered face broke into something resembling relief as he helped her down from the horse. They spoke rapidly in Apache, Kiona gesturing to her shoulder wound, to Hale, to the path behind them. Naichi's expression darkened as she talked, his eyes occasionally flicking to Hale with an assessment that felt like judgment and gratitude tangled together. "Sheriff Hale," Naichi said finally, switching to English. "My niece tells me you've sacrificed much to bring her here safely. Your friend, your reputation, perhaps your life." "It was the right thing to do," Hale said simply. "The right thing often costs the most." Naichi gestured toward the village. "Come. You both need rest, food, and medical attention. We have 2 days before the ceremony must be performed. 2 days to prepare, to heal, and to decide how we face what's coming." They walked into the village together. Women emerged from the wiki-ups, their faces showing surprise at seeing a white lawman among them. But Naichi's presence kept them silent. He led them to a larger structure at the canyon's center, ducking inside where the temperature dropped and shadows provided blessed relief from the desert heat. A fire burned in the center, smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. Naichi gestured for them to sit, then retrieved something from a leather bag against the wall. When he returned, he held a photograph, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. "Before we speak of the ceremony, there is something you must see." He handed the photograph to Hale. "This was taken 36 years ago, at the trading post in Socorro. Do you recognize anyone?" Hale's hands trembled as he looked at the image. 3 people stood before a adobe wall, a young Apache chief he assumed was Naiche, a woman in traditional dress, and a girl who couldn't have been more than 12. Her face serious and beautiful and heartbreakingly familiar. The woman with the high cheekbones and deep-set eyes and that particular way of holding her shoulders that spoke of pride barely contained. He'd memorized every detail of that posture over 35 years of marriage. "Margaret," he whispered. "Ayana," Naichi corrected gently. "Eternal blossom. My half-sister through our father's first wife. The bravest and most foolish woman I ever knew. The photograph slipped from Hale's fingers. Kiona caught it before it fell into the fire, holding it carefully as she watched Hale's face crumble. "The girl," Hale said, his voice breaking. "That's you." Kiona nodded. "I was 12. Ayana was 22. This was taken the summer before she met you. Before she decided that a soldier with kind eyes was worth more than her entire heritage. She never told me." The words came out strangled. 35 years. We had a son together. She died in my arms, and she never told me who she really was. "She told you everything that mattered," Naichi said. "She told you she loved you. She chose you over her people, over her family, over everything she'd ever known. What is a name compared to that?" But Hale wasn't listening. He was remembering. All those times Margaret had flinched when someone in town made a crude joke about Indians. The way she'd insisted Caleb learn to respect all people, no matter their background. Her tears when news came of Apache raids. When she'd lock herself in their bedroom and he'd hear her crying, but never knew why. The herbs she'd grown in their garden, traditional Apache medicine, he'd thought were just folk remedies. The lullaby she sang to Caleb that he'd always assumed was something she'd learned from her own mother, never realizing it was something from her own childhood. "You're her sister," he said to Kiona, the reality of it finally sinking in. "You're Margaret's sister, which means you're your son's aunt," Kiona finished. "Caleb has Apache blood running through his veins, though he doesn't know it. And the woman he's trying to kill is his own family." The irony was so savage it should have been funny. Instead, it felt like drowning. Hale put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, and for the second time in as many days, he wept not for Doc Miller or for himself, but for Margaret, who'd lived an entire lifetime wearing a mask, who'd died without ever being fully known, who'd protected him from the truth because she'd loved him more than she'd loved her own identity. Kiona moved beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. This woman, who should have been a stranger, who was supposed to be the enemy, held him while he broke apart. He could smell sage and smoke in her hair, the same scent that had always clung to Margaret's clothes, though he'd never understood why. "She wanted to tell you," Kiona whispered. "She wrote to me twice, after she'd been cast out. Said she dreamed of you meeting me someday, of our families joining, of proving that love could build bridges. But she was too afraid, too ashamed of being rejected by her people. She thought if you knew the truth, you'd see her differently, see her as less." "I would have loved her more," Hale choked out. "I would have fought for her, protected her, made sure she never felt alone. You did all of that anyway. That's why she loved you." Naichi let them sit in silence for a while before clearing his throat. "There is more you need to understand. The ceremony Kiona must perform, it's not just about peace between our tribes. It's about honoring the blood oath our ancestors made with yours." "Sheriff?" Hale looked up, confused. "My ancestors were Irish immigrants. They never had contact with Apache people. Not your blood ancestors, your chosen ancestors. The oath was made with white lawmen who believed in justice over prejudice. Men like you, though rare as rain in the desert." Naichi unfolded a piece of aged parchment covered in symbols. "When Ayana married you, she fulfilled part of the prophecy that a bridge would be built between our peoples through love. Now Kiona must complete it by performing the ceremony. But she cannot do it alone." "What do you mean?" The ritual requires two voices, one Apache, one white, one female, one male, one keeper of the old ways, one keeper of the new law. Naichi's eyes held Hale's. Aiyana was supposed to stand with Kiona 30 years from now, when the next blood moon came. But she's gone. So the duty falls to you, her husband, the father of her child, the man she trusted above all others. I don't know the words. I don't know the movements. Kiona will teach you. You have 2 days. Kiona stood, still weak but steady with purpose. The ceremony must happen at Temple Rock, where the first peace treaty was signed 3 generations ago. It's neutral ground, visible from both tribal territories and from Copper Ridge. Everyone will see it. Everyone will witness the covenant being renewed. That means Blackwood's men will know exactly where to find us, Hale said. Yes. They'll bring guns, lots of guns. Yes, we could die. Kiona's smile was sad and certain. My sister died hiding. I will not. If I must die, let it be standing in the sun, speaking truth, completing what she started. That's a death worth having. Naichi reached into his shirt and pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a silver ring, tarnished with age, but unmistakably Margaret's wedding band. Hale recognized the small chip in the metal from where she'd caught it on a fence post years ago. She sent this back to me before she died, Naichi said, pressing the ring into Hale's palm. Along with a message. She said if you ever needed to remember why you married her, why you chose her despite everything she couldn't give you, you should know this. She gave you the truest version of herself she could. The version that loved without condition, that forgave without keeping score, that saw the man you were trying to be rather than the man you feared you were. Hale closed his fist around the ring. It was still warm from Naichi's skin, as if Margaret herself had just taken it off. There's more, Naichi added quietly. Inside the band. An inscription. Hale held the ring up to the firelight and read the tiny words engraved inside. Protect my sister. Protect our son. Protect the bridge we built. She knew, Hale breathed. She knew something like this might happen. She was preparing for it, even then. Aiyana always saw further than the rest of us, Naichi said. She saw a future where her son might have to choose between greed and honor. She believed he would choose right, if given enough time and truth. Do you believe that too? Sheriff, Hale thought of Caleb, of the boy who used to bring him flowers he'd picked for Margaret, of the teenager who'd once stayed up all night nursing a wounded bird back to health, of the man who'd somehow lost his way so completely that he could order the murder of his own blood without knowing it. I have to believe it, Hale said. Because if I don't, then everything Margaret sacrificed was for nothing. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls red and gold, Kiona began teaching Hale the ceremony. The words were in Apache, complex and rhythmic, requiring him to memorize phonetic sounds he'd never made before. The movements were precise hands raised at specific angles, feet placed just so. A circular dance that spiraled inward toward the sacred center. They practiced for hours. Hale stumbled through the words, his tongue tripping over unfamiliar syllables, his aging body protesting the movements. But Kiona was patient, correcting him gently, showing him again and again until muscle memory began to form. As full darkness fell, they stopped to rest. Kiona sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and for a moment it felt like family, like something Margaret had wanted them to have all along. You know he'll come, Kiona said quietly. Your son, Blackwood will send him because he knows it will destroy you to have to choose. I know. Will you be able to do it? To stand against him if you have to? Hale looked at the ring on his finger, Margaret's ring. Now his. Your sister taught me that sometimes love means letting go. That the bravest thing you can do is allow people to face the consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart. He turned to Kiona. If Caleb comes with violence, I'll meet him with truth, and if that's not enough, if he chooses wrong even after knowing everything, then I'll stop him. Because that's what Margaret would want. She'd want me to save the bridge, even if it means losing the sun. Kiona took his hand. You're a good man. Thomas Hale, I understand now why my sister loved you. They sat in comfortable silence until the shouts began. Men on horseback at the canyon entrance, torches, gunfire. The raiders had found them sooner than expected, and they were coming in force. Naichi emerged from his wickiup, already armed. We'll hold them as long as we can. Get Kiona out the back trail. There's a path that leads to Temple Rock. You can reach it by dawn if you ride hard. How many? Hale asked. Too many. The village erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors taking positions behind rocks, women and children disappearing into hidden caves, the sound of rifles being loaded, of war cries echoing off stone walls. And somewhere in that mass of attacking riders, Hale knew, was Caleb, coming to finish what he'd started, coming to kill the aunt he didn't know he had, coming to destroy the last pieces of his mother's dream. 48 hours until the blood moon. But they might not survive the next 48 minutes. The attack came with the fury of a summer storm. 50 riders poured into the canyon, their torches turning night into hellish day. Gunfire echoed off stone walls, the sound multiplying until it seemed like 100 guns instead of 50. Hale grabbed Kiona's arm and pulled her toward the back of the village, where Naichi had indicated the hidden trail. They made it 20 yards before the flames started. Someone had thrown torches onto the wickiups. The dried grass and hide structures went up like kindling. Black smoke billowing into the sky. Women screamed. Children cried. Warriors returned fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned, fighting a defensive battle they couldn't possibly win. Hale fired his rifle at the advancing riders, dropping 2 before his ammunition ran out. Beside him, Kiona tried to run despite her injuries, stumbling over rocks in the chaos. An Apache warrior, barely 20 years old, fell in front of them, blood blooming across his chest. His eyes found Kiona's for just a moment before they went empty. Go! Naichi's voice cut through the pandemonium. He was 50 feet away, firing methodically at the raiders, his face carved from stone. Get her to Temple Rock. Nothing else matters. Hale half carried. Half dragged, Kiona through the smoke. Behind them, the village burned. People he'd just met, people who'd welcomed him into their home, were dying. The guilt of it threatened to crush him. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. This was what Margaret had asked of him. Protect Kiona. Protect the bridge. No matter the cost. They reached the back trail just as a rider cut them off. The man sat tall in his saddle, silhouetted against the flames. For a moment, Hale didn't recognize him. Then the rider removed his bandana, and the world stopped turning. Caleb. His son sat on that horse with a rifle across his lap and murder in his eyes. And Hale felt something inside himself break that could never be fixed. Hello, Pa, Caleb said. His voice was flat. emotionless, the voice of a stranger. "You've led us on quite a chase." "Caleb," Hale stepped forward, putting himself between his son and Kiona. "Son, listen to me. You don't understand what's happening here. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm cleaning up your mess." Caleb's eyes flicked to Kiona, cold and calculating. "You really thought you could hide her? Really thought you could betray your own people for one of them?" "She's not one of them. She's family. Caleb, she's your... Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare tell me she's family. Family doesn't matter to you anyway. Does it? You chose her over me, over your own blood." Hale's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst. "It's not like that, Caleb. I need you to listen. I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly." Caleb raised his rifle, pointing it at Kiona. "I understand that Blackwood is paying me $50,000 for proof she's dead. I understand that money will clear my debts and set me up for life. And I understand that you're standing in my way." Behind Caleb, more riders appeared, 20 men, maybe more, forming a semicircle that blocked any escape. Hale recognized some of them miners from town, ranch hands, even a few respected businessmen who'd apparently decided that gold was worth more than their souls. "That woman you want to kill," Hale said desperately. "Her name is Kiona, and before you pull that trigger, you need to know who she is, who your mother was." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. "Don't bring Ma into this. Your mother's real name was Ayoyana. She was Apache. Caleb, Western Apache, from Chief Naichi's tribe. She gave up everything, her family, her people, her identity to marry me, to give you a life." Hale's voice broke. "And that woman you're pointing a gun at, that's her sister, your aunt. You're trying to murder your own blood." The rifle wavered, just slightly, but enough that Hale saw it, saw the crack in his son's armor. "You're lying," Caleb said. But there was no conviction in it. "I'm not. Look at her, son. Really look at her. Look at the shape of her eyes. The way she holds her shoulders. The scar on her back that matches the one your mother had." Caleb's gaze shifted to Kiona. She stood straight despite her injuries, despite the gun aimed at her heart, and pulled her shirt down to expose her shoulder blade. There, carved into her skin, was a pattern of scars, ritual punishment marks, that told a story of exile and pain. "Ma had those," Caleb whispered. "I saw them once when I was little. She told me she fell from a horse. She lied to protect you, to protect us all, because she knew what this town would do if they found out." Hale took a step closer to his son. "Caleb, you have Apache blood in your veins. You're hunting your own people. You're trying to kill your own family." The rifle dropped a few inches. Caleb's face had gone pale, his hands shaking. Around him, the other riders shifted uneasily, sensing weakness, sensing the moment slipping away from them. "I didn't know," Caleb said. His voice sounded young suddenly, lost. "Ma never said. She never told me. She was protecting you from this exact moment, from having to choose between who you are and what other people told you to be." Hale reached out his hand. "Come down from that horse. Son, come down and we'll figure this out together. How touching." The voice came from behind the line of riders. They parted, and Samuel Blackwood rode through on a black stallion that probably cost more than most men made in a year. He was dressed in an expensive suit despite the desert heat, looking more like he was heading to a boardroom than a massacre. The family reunion is heartwarming, really, but I'm afraid we have business to conclude. Blackwood reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder. Sheriff Hale, do you know what this is? Hale said nothing. This is a land deed, signed by the previous Apache chief 15 years ago, witnessed by your wife, though, of course. We didn't know she was Apache at the time. Funny how that works. Blackwood opened the folder with theatrical precision. The deed states that if certain conditions are met specifically, if a white lawman protects the ceremony keeper during the blood moon and ensures peace between the tribes, then said lawman inherits 1,000 acres of land that just happens to contain the richest gold deposit in the territory. The words hung in the air like smoke. I found this deed in the Territorial Records Office 6 months ago. Blackwood continued. Been sitting there for over a decade, waiting for someone smart enough to understand what it meant. Your wife knew about it? Sheriff, she knew that if you did your duty, if you protected her sister, you'd become a wealthy man. She set you up to inherit a fortune. Hale felt like he'd been punched. Margaret wouldn't she? She was Apache, wasn't she? Who knows what other secrets she kept? Blackwood's smile was poison. But here's the interesting part. If both you and the ceremony keeper die before the blood moon, the land reverts to territorial control, which means it becomes available for legitimate purchase by, say, a mining company with the right connections. You've been planning this for 15 years, Hale said numbly. Not 15, just 6 months. Since I found the deed. But I've been very thorough. Blackwood gestured to Caleb. Your son, for instance. Those gambling debts, I bought them. That loan that's been keeping him afloat, mine. He owes me everything now. Sheriff, his loyalty isn't to you or to his Apache heritage. It's to the man who can make his problems disappear. Caleb's face had gone from pale to gray. You said the money was just for stopping the ceremony. You never said anything about land or inheritance or... I said what you needed to hear to do what I needed done. That's how business works, boy. Blackwood pulled out a pistol and aimed it casually at Hale. Now we're going to simplify things. I'm going to shoot the sheriff and his Apache friend. You're going to get your money, and we'll all pretend this little revelation about bloodlines never happened. Sound fair? No. The word came from Caleb, stronger than Hale expected. You lied to me. You manipulated me. You made me try to kill my own family. You were easy to manipulate because you're weak, just like your father, just like your mother was weak enough to betray her people for a white man's bed. Blackwood cocked his pistol. Now step aside. I said no. For a moment, father and son looked at each other across the distance. In Caleb's eyes, Hale saw something he thought had died years ago, the boy who'd cried when they had to put down a lame horse, the teenager who'd defended a Mexican worker from racist taunts, the young man who'd once told his father he wanted to be exactly like him. Then gunfire erupted. But it came from the wrong direction. From behind Blackwood's line, 3 shots, precise and deadly, dropping the men closest to Blackwood. Deputy Jacob Stone rode in hard, his rifle smoking. His face was set in lines of grim determination that Hale had never seen before. Enough, Stone shouted. Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of on the way back to town. Blackwood turned, surprise flickering across his features. Stone, you fool. I paid you good money to... To look the other way, not to watch innocent people get slaughtered? Stone dismounted, his rifle trained on Blackwood. My conscience has a price. But apparently watching children burn wasn't included in the negotiation. You'll hang for this, Blackwood snarled. Probably. But at least I'll hang, knowing I did one decent thing in my miserable life. Stone glanced at Hale. Thomas, get her out of here. Get to Temple Rock. I'll hold them as long as Blackwood moved fast. His pistol came up and fired twice. The first shot caught Stone in the chest, the second in his throat. The deputy went down hard, blood spreading across the desert sand in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost artistic in their horror. Stone tried to speak, but only blood came out. His eyes found Hale's, and in them was something like apology, something like redemption, something like peace. Then he was gone. Anyone else want to play hero? Blackwood asked the assembled riders. None of them moved. They'd just watched their leader kill a lawman without hesitation. The message was clear: loyalty to Blackwood meant survival. Everything else meant death. Blackwood turned back to Hale. Now, where were we? But Caleb was already moving. He threw himself from his horse, landing between his father and Blackwood's gun. His own rifle came up, aimed at the man who'd bought his soul with promises and lies. You're not shooting my father, Caleb said. Your father or your paycheck. Choose. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. His whole body was shaking, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool night air. Every dream of easy money, every fantasy of escaping his failures, every rationalization he'd built to justify his choices, it all came down to this moment. Caleb, Hale said softly, you don't have to do this. You don't have to be brave. Just get out of the way and save yourself. That's what I've been doing my whole life. Pa, saving myself, looking out for number one, making excuses. Caleb's voice was thick with tears. Ma would be ashamed of who I became. I can't change that. But maybe I can change what happens next. How noble, Blackwood sneered. The prodigal son returns. But you're forgetting something, boy. I own you. I own your debts, your future, your very life. You pull that trigger and everything you've worked for disappears. Then it disappears. Some things are worth more than money. Caleb looked back at his father. Right. Pa, that's what you always tried to teach me. Hale's throat was too tight to answer. He just nodded. I'm sorry, Caleb whispered. For everything. For losing my way. For hurting people. For not being the son you deserved. You're being that son right now, Hale managed. Caleb smiled. It was sad and beautiful, and the last thing Hale saw before his son pulled the trigger. But Blackwood had been faster. His shot caught Caleb in the shoulder, the same shoulder where he'd shot Kiona days ago. The symmetry was perfect and terrible. Caleb went down with a cry of pain, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. Hale lunged for his son, but rough hands grabbed him from behind. Blackwood's men had closed in during the confrontation. They bound his wrists with rope, forced him to his knees in the dirt. He could see Caleb bleeding out, could see Kiona being similarly restrained, could see the flames still consuming the Apache village in the distance, and he was powerless, completely, utterly powerless to stop any of it. Take them to Temple Rock, Blackwood ordered. We'll finish this where everyone can see. Make an example of them. Show the whole territory what happens to Indian lovers and traders. As they dragged Hale toward his horse, he looked back at his son. Caleb's eyes were open, conscious but weak. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. Their eyes met one last time across the chaos. Caleb mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Then they hauled Hale away into the darkness, and he didn't know if he'd ever see his son alive again. 18 hours until the blood moon. But first, they had to survive until dawn. They rode through the night in silence. Blackwood's men had tied Hale's hands to a saddle horn, positioned Kiona on a horse beside him with similar restraints. A dozen armed riders surrounded them, ensuring no escape was possible. Behind them, the Apache village still burned, smoke rising into the starlit sky like prayers that would never be answered. Hale's mind kept circling back to Caleb, the image of his son bleeding in the dirt. The way those 2 words, "I'm sorry," had shaped themselves on lips that might never speak again. Had the bullet hit anything vital? Would he bleed out before anyone could help him? The questions tormented him, but he had no answers. Only the hollow ache of a father who might have lost his son just as they were finally understanding each other. Beside him, Kiona rode with her head high despite her exhaustion and pain. She hadn't spoken since they'd been captured. But her silence wasn't defeat. It was conservation, saving her strength for what was coming. Temple Rock appeared as dawn broke a massive stone formation that rose from the desert floor like a monument built by gods. Its surface was covered in ancient petroglyphs, symbols that predated any living memory. At its base was a flat ceremonial ground, perfectly circular, marked by stones arranged in patterns that spoke of careful ritual and profound meaning. Blackwood had already arrived. He'd ridden ahead with a smaller group, and now stood at the center of the circle, looking like a king surveying his domain. Around the perimeter, he'd positioned 20 men with rifles. Whatever happened here would be witnessed, but it would also be controlled. "Bring them," Blackwood ordered. They dragged Hale and Kiona from their horses and shoved them to their knees in the dirt. The sun was rising behind Temple Rock, painting everything in shades of red and gold. In different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. "This is where it ends," Blackwood said, addressing not just them but his assembled men. "This is where we show the territory that no amount of ceremony or sentiment will stand in the way of progress. That gold belongs to white men who know how to use it, not to savages who'll waste it on..." A gunshot interrupted him. One of his perimeter guards dropped, then another shot. Another guard fell. Confusion rippled through Blackwood's men. They turned, rifles raised, scanning the rocks and scrub brush for threats. But the landscape was deceptive here, full of shadows and hiding places, perfect for anyone who knew how to use them. A wagon appeared on the eastern trail, an old freight wagon pulled by 2 tired horses, driven by a woman in a dark dress and a wide-brimmed hat. As it drew closer, Hale recognized her, Sarah Mae Johnson. The 70-year-old shopkeeper drove that wagon like she was 30 years younger, whipping the horses into a gallop straight toward Temple Rock. 3 Apache warriors rode behind her, covering her approach with precise rifle fire that kept Blackwood's men pinned down. "Get down!" someone shouted, and chaos erupted. Sarah pulled the wagon to a stop between Hale and Blackwood's position. She jumped down with surprising agility, a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other. The knife cut through Hale's bonds in one smooth motion, while the pistol pointed at the nearest guard. "Thomas Hale, you're the most stubborn man I've ever known," Sarah said. "But Margaret loved you for it. So I suppose there's no accounting for taste." The Apache warriors, Hale recognized one as Naichi's son, had taken positions behind the wagon's bulk. They provided covering fire while Sarah worked on freeing Kiona. "How did you..." Hale started. Found your boy bleeding to death about an hour ago. Patched him up enough that he'll live, which is more than he deserves, but less than Margaret would want. Sarah's hands moved quickly, professionally. He told me where they were taking you, told me everything. Actually, boy had a lot to confess. He's alive. Hope surged through Hale's chest, almost painful in its intensity. Alive and repenting, said to tell you he's going to spend the rest of his life making this right. Sarah got Kiona's bonds cut and pressed something into Hale's hand. But first, you need to read this. Margaret gave it to me 15 years ago with specific instructions. Said if you ever needed to remember why you married her, why she chose you, I should give you this letter. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with wax that bore Margaret's fingerprint. Hale's hands shook as he broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside. The gunfire continued around them, but everything else faded as he read his dead wife's words. My dearest Thomas, the letter began. If you're reading this, then everything I feared has come to pass. The ceremony, the violence, the choice between family and future. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to help you through it. I'm sorry for so many things. Hale's vision blurred. He blinked away tears and kept reading. I need you to know that every day I hid my true identity from you was both a betrayal and an act of love. I betrayed the woman I was born to be. But I loved you so completely that becoming someone else felt like the only way to keep you safe. To keep our son safe. To build a bridge that might one day connect our peoples. The letter went on, detailing things Margaret had never said aloud. Her fear that Caleb would grow up hating his own blood. Her hope that Kiona would one day meet Hale and see in him the kind of man worth trusting. Her belief that love could heal wounds deeper than any blade could cut. If Caleb has lost his way, Margaret wrote, please remember he's still my son. Still your son. Still capable of choosing right if given enough truth and time. The boy I raised is still in there, beneath whatever darkness has claimed him. Find him. Thomas, bring him back. The final paragraph made Hale's breath catch. I gave you the truest version of myself I could manage. The version that loved without condition, that forgave without keeping score, that saw the man you were trying to be rather than the man you feared you were. You gave me a family when my own people cast me out. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. You gave me a son who carries the blood of 2 worlds in his veins and the power to unite them if he chooses. That's more than most people get in 10 lifetimes. Thank you, my love. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Now I'm asking you to do one more thing. Protect my sister. Protect our son. Protect the bridge we built. That's all I ask. That's everything. It was signed simply, Forever yours, Ayiyana. Hale folded the letter carefully and placed it against his heart. Around him, the firefight was dying down. Blackwood's men were retreating, overwhelmed by Apache reinforcements who'd appeared from every direction. Chief Naichi himself rode in, commanding his warriors with hand signals and sharp words in their native tongue. But Blackwood wasn't finished. He stood in the center of the ceremonial circle with his pistol drawn, using one of his own men as a human shield. It's over. Blackwood, Hale called out. Let it go. It's not over until I say it's over. Blackwood's face was red with fury and desperation. That land is mine. That gold is mine. I won't let some half-breed ceremony steal it from me. Kiona stepped forward. Despite everything, the injuries, the exhaustion, the trauma, she walked with dignity toward the ceremonial circle. Hale moved to follow, but she held up a hand to stop him. "The ceremony requires 2 voices," she said, "mine and yours. But first, I must enter the circle alone. That's the tradition. He'll shoot you. Perhaps, but some things are worth dying for." Kiona looked back at him with eyes that held the same fierce determination Margaret's had carried. "My sister died hiding who she was. I won't make that mistake." She entered the circle. Blackwood's pistol tracked her movement. "One more step, and I'll—" A shot rang out, but it came from the eastern trail, from a rider who'd just appeared on a horse that was lathered and exhausted from being pushed too hard. The rider sat crooked in the saddle, his left arm hanging useless, blood soaking through makeshift bandages. Caleb. His shot had been true despite the pain, despite the distance. It caught Blackwood's gun hand, sending the pistol spinning into the dust. The mining magnate screamed and clutched his shattered wrist, and his human shield took the opportunity to scramble away to safety. Caleb slid from his horse and nearly fell. Hale caught him, holding his son upright through sheer will. "I couldn't let him hurt her." Caleb gasped. "Couldn't let him hurt family. Not again. Never again." "You saved her," Hale said. "You saved us all." "Just returning the favor. You saved me first." Naichi's warriors moved in and secured Blackwood, binding him with the same rope he'd used on Hale. The mining magnate was still screaming about his hand, about his rights, about lawsuits and territorial courts and influential friends. Nobody was listening. The sun had fully risen now. The blood moon would come tonight, in just 12 hours. Kiona moved to the center of the circle and knelt, her hands pressed flat against the ancient stone. When she looked up at Hale, there was peace in her expression. "It's time," she said. "Will you help me finish what my sister started?" Hale helped Caleb sit against a boulder where he could rest, then joined Kiona in the circle. She began teaching him the ceremonial words one more time, her voice rising and falling in rhythms that felt older than memory. He repeated them, his accent terrible, his pronunciation worse, but his intention pure. They practiced through the morning and into the afternoon. The Apache witnesses gathered in silence, respecting the sacred nature of what was being prepared. Even Blackwood's captured men were quiet, perhaps sensing that they were watching something larger than themselves, something that had been building toward this moment for generations. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Kiona took Hale's hands in hers. "Tonight," she said, "we speak for our peoples, for the bridges that have been burned and the bridges yet to build, for my sister who loved you, for your son who's learning to love himself, for all the lost and lonely who need to know that forgiveness is possible." "I'm ready," Hale said. But before she could respond, fresh gunfire erupted from the ridge above Temple Rock. Blackwood's reinforcements, the ones he'd held in reserve, were making a final desperate assault. 20 men, maybe more, charging down the slope with rifles blazing and hatred in their hearts. Naichi's warriors returned fire, but they were badly positioned. Some would get through. Some would reach the ceremonial circle before they could be stopped. Caleb struggled to his feet, his good hand reaching for the rifle he'd dropped. "I can—" "No!" Kiona pushed him back down. "You've done enough. Your part in this is to survive, to carry the story forward." She turned to face the attacking men, standing at the edge of the ceremonial circle, unarmed, unafraid, ready to die, standing rather than live kneeling. But Caleb had other plans. He threw himself in front of his aunt just as the first attacker broke through the defensive line. The man's rifle was already firing, the bullet already in flight, aimed directly at Kiona's heart. It caught Caleb instead, square in the chest, just right of center. He went down hard, blood spreading across his shirt in a pattern that looked too much like the wound that had killed Deputy Stone. No. Hale's scream tore from somewhere deep inside, somewhere primitive and broken. But Caleb was smiling. Through the pain, through the blood, through everything. He was smiling. Saved her, he whispered. Finally, saved someone. The Apache warriors finished off the remaining attackers. Silence fell over Temple Rock like a shroud, and Hale knelt beside his son, holding him the way he'd held him as a baby, as a child, in all the moments before everything had gone so terribly wrong. "Stay with me," Hale begged. "Caleb, stay with me. We're not done yet. We still have time. We have exactly enough time." Caleb managed. His breathing was labored, wet-sounding, bad. "Tell Ma. Tell her I finally understood. About love, about sacrifice, about being more than your worst mistakes. You can tell her yourself. You're not dying today. I won't allow it." Caleb's laugh was more bubble than sound. "Don't think. You get to choose. Pa." But Kiona was there, kneeling beside them both. Her hands moved over Caleb's wound, pressing hard to slow the bleeding. She began to sing not the ceremonial words, but something else. A healing song, soft and rhythmic, that seemed to come from the stones themselves. "You're not allowed to die," she told Caleb. "You still owe me an apology, a proper one, with words and everything. Sorry, I shot you. See, that wasn't so hard." Kiona kept singing, kept pressing, kept fighting death with nothing but will and love and the faint hope that sometimes mercy wins. The sun touched the western horizon, 6 hours until the blood moon, and Caleb Hale's heart was still beating. Caleb held on. Through the afternoon heat and into the evening, he held on. Sarah Mae Johnson worked with supplies she'd brought in the wagon, bandaging and stitching with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen too many frontier injuries. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, punctured a lung, but not fatally, exited clean through his back. "Lucky," Sarah said, though luck seemed like the wrong word for a man bleeding out in the desert. As the sun set and the sky turned purple, then indigo, then black, Kiona and Hale prepared for the ceremony. The moon rose in the east, already tinged red with the atmospheric conditions that marked it as the blood moon. Ancient peoples had feared this phenomenon, seen it as a portent of war and disaster. Tonight, it would mean peace, if they could complete the ritual. Kiona stood at the center of the ceremonial circle, her injuries forgotten in the gravity of the moment. Hale took his position opposite her, Margaret's ring on his finger catching the moonlight. Around them, witnesses gathered Apache from both tribes, the remnants of Blackwood's captured men, Sarah and her wagon. Even Caleb propped against a rock where he could see everything. Chief Naichi raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried across the desert floor with authority that needed no amplification. "Tonight, we renew the covenant made by our ancestors. Tonight, we choose peace when war would be easier. Tonight, we honor those who sacrificed everything to build bridges between our peoples." His eyes found Hale's. A white lawman and an Apache keeper. Two voices becoming one. Let the ceremony begin. Kiona started singing. The words were ancient Apache. Syllables that predated written language. Sounds that carried the weight of 3 generations of hope and loss. Her voice was clear despite everything she'd endured, rising into the red-lit night like prayer made audible. Hale joined her. His pronunciation was still terrible, his accent wrong, but it didn't matter. The power wasn't in perfection, but in intention. In the willingness to stand in that circle and speak words of peace when everyone around them had chosen violence. They moved in the ritual dance, spiraling inward toward each other. Each step was deliberate, each gesture laden with meaning. The moon climbed higher, its red color deepening, and the ceremony continued. When their hands finally met at the center of the circle, something shifted. Hale felt it not supernatural, not magical, but real nonetheless. The weight of generations releasing. The possibility of something new taking root in soil that had been watered with too much blood. Kiona's voice rose to a crescendo, and Hale's joined hers, their words becoming one sound, one prayer, one promise that maybe, just maybe, humans could choose better than their worst impulses. Then it was done. The ceremony completed, the covenant renewed, and the moon shone down on Temple Rock with light that had turned from blood red to soft silver as atmospheric conditions shifted. The Apache witnesses erupted in ululation and celebration. The 2 tribal chiefs who had not spoken to each other in 5 years stepped forward and clasped hands over the spot where Hale and Kiona had stood. Papers were produced, agreements signed, a peace treaty drafted on the spot that would last 50 years if both sides honored it. Samuel Blackwood, still bound and nursing his shattered wrist, watched it all with an expression of absolute defeat. His empire, built on hatred and greed, had crumbled in a single night. The territorial marshal had already been summoned. He would face trial for conspiracy, murder, fraud, and a dozen other charges that would keep him in prison until he was too old to remember why wealth had ever mattered. Hale walked to where Caleb lay. His son's eyes were open, watching the celebration with something like wonder on his face. "We did it," Caleb whispered. "Pa, we actually did it." "You did it," Hale corrected. "You saved her. You chose right when it mattered most. I chose so much wrong before that. Years of wrong, hurt so many people." Tears tracked down Caleb's face, cutting through the dust and blood. "How do you come back from that? One day at a time, one choice at a time. One act of courage at a time." Hale took his son's hand. "Your mother would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. I don't deserve. None of us deserve the grace we're given. We just have to be brave enough to accept it." Hale looked up at the moon, no longer red, just bright and beautiful and full of promise. "You'll face consequences for what you've done. You'll spend time in prison, probably years. But when you come out, you'll have a family waiting, a father who forgives you, an aunt who needs you, a legacy worth living up to." Caleb's grip tightened. "I'll make it right. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. I know you will, son. I know you will." 1 week later. Copper Ridge looked different in the morning light. The town had gathered at the church not for a funeral, though they'd held plenty of those in recent days. Doc Miller, Deputy Stone, and 7 Apache warriors who died in the village attack had been laid to rest with full honors. Today they gathered for something else: reconciliation. Reverend William Cooper stood at the pulpit, his Bible open, but his eyes on the faces before him. White settlers filled the left side of the church. Apache families filled the right. In the center aisle, a space had been left open, a bridge waiting to be crossed. "We have sinned," the Reverend began. "As a community, as individuals, as children of God who forgot that all people are created in His image. We allowed fear and greed to poison our hearts. We allowed men like Samuel Blackwood to divide us for profit. We forgot the basic truth that our mothers taught us: love your neighbor as yourself." Hale sat in the front pew with Kiona beside him. She wore a simple dress that Sarah had made. Her hair braided in the Apache tradition, but her presence in the church a statement that bridges could be built. Chief Naichi sat on her other side, his weathered face serious but not hostile, open to possibility. "Today we begin again," Reverend Cooper continued. "Today we choose peace. Today we remember Margaret Hale, born Ayana of the Western Apache, who lived between two worlds and loved them both, who taught us by her life that we are all more than the labels others put on us, who believed that her son would one day choose honor over hate." At the back of the church, in chains but present at his own request, Caleb Hale listened. The territorial court had sentenced him to 5 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. 5 years to think about his choices, to study Apache language and history, to prepare for a life spent building what he'd tried to tear down. The judge had been lenient, given his ultimate actions at Temple Rock, but justice still demanded a price. After the service, people mingled in the churchyard. Awkward at first, then gradually more natural. Apache mothers traded recipes with white settlers. Children played together, their innocence not yet corrupted by their parents' prejudices. Men who'd shot at each other a week ago now discussed crops and water rights and the practical matters of coexistence. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be easy. But it was a beginning. Sarah Mae Johnson cornered Hale by the water pump. "Margaret would have loved this," she said. "All of it. The ceremony, the peace. Even Caleb going to prison if it means he becomes a better man. I wish she could have seen it. Who says she didn't?" Sarah smiled. "I may be old, Thomas, but I'm not too old to believe in things I can't see. Love, hope. The possibility that a woman who died 15 years ago still shapes the world through the choices she made, the people she loved, the bridges she built." Hale looked across the churchyard to where Kiona was teaching a group of white children an Apache hand game. They laughed as they played, their joy uncomplicated by the weight of history. This is what Margaret had wanted. This is what she died protecting. "I'm adopting her," Hale said. "Making it official. Kiona will be my daughter legally, and not just in my heart. Margaret would love that too, having her sister and her husband as family, completing the circle she started." Sarah patted his arm. "You're a good man, Thomas Hale. Better than this town deserves. But we're grateful for you anyway." That evening, Hale and Kiona sat on the porch of his small house watching the sunset over Copper Ridge. The town looked the same, but felt different. Softer, less angry, as if violence had been a fever that finally broke, leaving everyone weak but healing. "Chief Naichi invited us to the autumn ceremony," Kiona said. "Both of us. He wants you to be recognized officially as part of the tribe, as family." Hale was quiet for a moment. "I'm honored, but I'm not Apache. I don't have the right. Rights are given, not born. My sister gave you the right when she married you. I gave you the right when you saved my life. The tribe gives you the right by recognizing your honor. Kiona leaned her head against his shoulder. Besides, you're stuck with me now. I'm your daughter, which makes you my father, which makes you Apache whether you like it or not. He laughed. It felt good to laugh. Your sister used to say the same thing, that I was Apache by marriage, even if I didn't speak the language or know the customs. She was right. She was right about a lot of things. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. From town came the sound of children playing, of families settling in for the night, of life continuing despite everything that had tried to stop it. A letter had arrived that morning from the territorial prison. Caleb's handwriting, careful and deliberate. Pa, I'm learning Apache. It's hard but good. Makes me feel closer to Ma, to Kiona, to the man I should have been all along. They let me teach reading here to the other prisoners. Some of them can't read at all. I like helping. Never thought I'd like helping. Maybe that's what redemption feels like, discovering you're better than you thought you were. Love, your son. Hale had cried reading it. Cried and felt grateful and hopeful all at once. 5 years would pass. Caleb would emerge changed. And they would be waiting a family cobbled together from loss and love and the stubborn belief that people could choose better. Tomorrow we plant the garden, Kiona said. Herbs, the ones my sister used to grow, the ones that kept her connected to her people even when she couldn't speak their names. She would like that. She would love that. Kiona stood and stretched. I'm going to bed. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Building this new world takes effort. She kissed his forehead and went inside, leaving Hale alone with the night and the stars and the memory of a woman who'd loved him enough to become someone else. He pulled out Margaret's ring the one night she had returned and read the inscription again. Protect my sister. Protect our son. Protect the bridge we built. I did it, Margaret, he whispered to the darkness. I kept my promise. Our son is lost but finding his way. Your sister is safe and home. The bridge holds. Everything you sacrificed meant something. Everything you hoped for came true. The wind carried his words away into the desert night. And somewhere in memory or heaven or the space between heartbeats, Hale believed she heard him and smiled. Folks, this story reminds us that it's never too late to choose right over easy. And family isn't always about blood, it's about who shows up when life gets hard. Sheriff Hale teaches us something powerful. The bridges we build with love outlast every wall we build with fear. Margaret lived her whole life protecting the people she loved, even if it meant hiding who she was. That's the kind of sacrifice parents make. The kind grandparents understand in their bones. And Caleb, he shows us that our worst mistakes don't have to define us. Redemption is real. Forgiveness is possible. The legacy we leave isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to choose better when it matters most. Think about the bridges in your own life. The people who stood by you when the whole world turned away. The second chances you've been given, or the ones you've given others. That's what makes us human. That's what makes life worth living. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? And what family member or friend showed you grace when you didn't deserve it? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that love always wins in the end.